Every year, around 1,000 refugees flee their homes and arrive on the shores of Malta. They left everything behind in search of a new refuge. They arrive in Malta with nothing but hope. It is estimated that only 1 out of 3 people who attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea will survive the journey. When they arrive in Malta, they are placed in a detention center for a period of around 6 months. The detention center is prison-like, and their refugees are not allowed to leave before the asylum application is approved. After receiving the status of asylum, they are allowed to leave the detention center. The Maltese government then offers them a year of free accommodation in an asylum open centre in Malta. These centres are intended to assist the refugees with their integration process into the social environment of Malta. The open centres is a temporary refuge for a period of 1 year and is not intended to be a permanent place of residence. My project is about the Asylum Open Centre in Malta called Hal-Far. The centre is situated on the outskirts of the island on an old military base. Like many asylum centres, they are intentionally placed outside of the economic hub in order to hide them from the public eye. The centre is isolated, on its own, without any social and economic support around it. The Hal-Far Open Centre in its current state resembles the likes of a prison. The place is surrounded by a tall wall with only one point of entry. The reason for this is to exercise control over the people who live there. From a political point of view, the place should not be inviting. Container homes are placed inside the high wall in rigid linear rows. It is almost impossible to think that this open centre will help the refugees integrate into the social environment of Malta. It has no social spaces, no trees, no places of rest, no entertainment, and no economic possibilities. My intention is to create a new typology for a temporary refugee asylum centre. I'll be using the example of the Hal-Far Open Centre in Malta as a case study. In this new typology, I will aim to create a place of refuge, a place that will assist the people living there in their ongoing journey to integrate into the social environment they find themselves in. This will include a multitude of social public spaces where all walks of life can meet each other and form friendships. Furthermore, I will aim to create enough social economic opportunities so that the people can find a purpose for their daily lives. I will also try to create comfortable living quarters by reusing the existing container homes. Although the site is surrounded by an agricultural landscape and a few industrial businesses, I wanted to create a small settlement on its own. I started by looking at the existing urban patterns of Malta. I then overlaid some existing found patterns, for example the urban layout of the old city called Medina, onto the site. By abstracting and applying these patterns, I arrived at a master urban plan for the site. The master plan is made up of small urban pockets, which is then divided by pedestrian streets. These urban pockets are then further divided by smaller pedestrian walkways connected to a central small garden and courtyard. This layout responds to the vernacular urban patterns in Malta, but it also responds to the climatic way of living on the island. It aims to reduce strong wind flows, direct water and drainage systems, and most importantly, it creates a base layout for future development of the site into a more permanent village. On the eastern side of the site, I created a more public zone, which is made of a wall architectural typology. It is an abstracted version of the walls which surround all medieval towns in Malta. The architecture of this zone is intended to be permanent and provide a subtle gesture of how the architecture would look like if the site is to be developed further. The remaining urban pockets of the site is then filled in with the existing reused temporary container homes. To connect the outside world with the inside, I established 2 public bus stops on the western and eastern sides of the site. The intention is that it will act as a connection node to both insiders and outsiders. Within the site, I've also created a multitude of public social spaces such as a piazza, the sporting zone, an amphitheatre, small public squares, a multitude of small resting spaces, integrated commercial pockets, and a meditation tower. On the eastern side of the site is a more pedestrian-friendly street where less car traffic flows. On this side of the site, the wall architecture is placed. Although it's called a wall, it will not keep people out, but rather invite them in through a broken up configuration of spaces. The wall architecture derives its form from the dimensions of 2 containers placed next to each other on plan. It is constructed by reusing the existing stone from the original site boundary wall. The architecture reflects the vernacular architecture found on the island of Malta, such as curved openings, courtyards, usable flat rooftops, and double volume spaces. The building technology reflects the traditional way of building on the island, such as thick 500mm stone walls, timber roof beams, and flat roofs. Where the roofs are not used for outdoor spaces, I've introduced green roofs, which contributes to a more comfortable climatic zone for the indoor spaces. It was very important to me that the new wall architecture integrates with the vernacular architecture of Malta and in a way create a sense of timelessness. When you walk around in the old cities of Malta, you would never notice plastic downpipes, for example. As such, I've created a specific detail that eliminates the modern way of using downpipes and rather treat the rainwater in a more traditional way by directing it out via concrete gutter outlets. The program of the wall architecture intends to be very social, and it creates various meeting places for both insiders and outsiders. The most public zone of the wall architecture includes an open-air market connected to a public piazza square that looks onto a football field. The open-air market is intended to be a public meeting space during the week and a fresh produce market over a weekend that will attract visitors and tourists. Neighboring the open-air market is a cultural restaurant, a tea shop, and an art shop. The cultural restaurant creates an opportunity where the inhabitants can cook traditional meals from their own country and in return attract visitors and tourists that would want to experience African homemade cuisines. The various vegetable gardens situated within the site can provide fresh produce to be used at the restaurant, but it can also be sold at the market over weekends. The tea shop is a less formal meeting place where people can meet each other. The art shop creates a space where the refugees can sell their own homemade works and where people can get more information about the settlement. Further along the wall architecture is a small grocery shop which serves the site with basic amenities. It replaces the temporary informal van currently selling basic supplies to the inhabitants. As the wall architecture becomes less public, it hosts workshop spaces intended to create an opportunity where the refugees can acquire handworking skills and find a daily purpose for their lives. The workshops consists of a woodworking workshop and a smaller art making workshop. The workshops are connected to each other by small courtyard spaces and a bigger public square. The public square in front of the workshop spaces act as a buffer between the workshops and the living quarters. A lecturing hall is the last feature of the wall architecture, where the refugees can learn English and attend other educational programs. Disconnected from the wall and found more integrated into the site is a smaller public square surrounded by the container homes. This smaller square is where the meditation tower is located. It is a tower-like structure made of the same stone as the wall architecture. The program of the tower is to be a flexible meditation space where the inhabitants can find silence and peace. It is located on the edge of the site, away from the main streets and the public zone. It opens up onto a small square with many trees and seating spaces. The idea of this tower and meditation center is not only to create a place of retreat, but also to create a sense of identity. The tower can be seen from a distance and establishes a sense of position for the community in a part of the island that has no significant identity. The construction of the tower is made from the traditional stone found at the site and can be constructed by the refugees themselves over a period of time. The tower can then become a symbol for the current site, which is the in-between space for the refugees. In future, the tower can be a symbol that reflects back to the current situation, when perhaps the containers are removed and the site transformed and used differently. Touching the wall very lightly and filling up the remaining urban pockets are the container homes. They are purposefully reused as opposed to building new living quarters because of the limited financial resources available for these kind of projects. The current container homes currently houses about 1,000 adult males. Adult males account for over 80% of the refugee arrivals in Malta. I've arranged the containers in various configurations so that small courtyards and walkways are formed. The configuration is based on a system where they are self-supported and do not require any additional engineering to keep them structurally sound. All services are located on the ground floor in order to simplify the services connected to the container homes. Also found on this level is the communal kitchen and lounge, the bathrooms and the bedrooms. These spaces are arranged around semi-private courtyards that create a sense of home. The courtyard is a place where individual identities can be expressed. On the first floor level, accessed by the existing reused spiral staircases, are only bedrooms. The rooms can accommodate 1 to 3 people and consists of a bed, a table and a small wardrobe. The first floor walkways do not only connect bedrooms with each other, but becomes social spaces on its own. Firstly, vegetable boxes are placed on the walkways where vegetables can be grown to be sold at the market and be used in the cultural restaurant. In other ways, the walkways becomes a social meeting place and can be used as a small pavilion that looks over the football field. The container home configurations are clustered together around the more permanent pedestrian walkways and integrated public vegetable garden and squares. These public vegetable gardens and squares create another meeting place for both insiders and outsiders. The construction of these vegetable gardens are made of the rubble stones from the demolition of the existing boundary wall. It can be constructed over a period of time by the refugees themselves so that it establishes a sense of ownership. The walls of these vegetable gardens also resembles the existing agricultural site walls found around the site. In order to make these living quarters more comfortable, I introduced various systems to cool down the container homes. Firstly, by layering and insulating the inside of the container homes with recycled wool insulation and plywood. On the outside of the containers, I introduced green screens, which creates a buffer between the sun and the containers. The green screens are filled with bougainvillea plants, which is found growing on the walls of houses all over Malta. By introducing the bougainvillea plants, I tried to connect the temporary containers with the permanent outside world. In the courtyard and on the walkways, I've introduced fabric-like tent structures which creates shade and protects the spaces from the scorching sun. The roofs of the first floor containers has a green roof system which further cools down the indoor climate of the containers. These green roofs further act as a way to connect the container typology to the wall typology and make it one integrated space. Some of the containers are not used for housing but rather offers a space to be converted and used by the refugees themselves. These containers consist of a flexible layout so that the refugees can configure their own programs. For example, they could become a small cafe, a barber shop, a samosa shop, or a cell phone shop. These flexible containers are situated on the edge of the urban pockets and are economic instigators and social meeting spaces. Central to this project is the interconnected social public meeting spaces. These spaces are without a program, but are very important to the everyday lives of the people living there. They will create opportunities where people can meet without pressure to engage in a social program or system. The first example is that of a basic seating wall located on the edge of the urban pockets in the site. It's a small wall just off the main pedestrian street with a tree providing shade against the hot sun. The seating pockets are scattered all over the site and create small refuges outside of the container home configurations and away from the public zone, just off the main circulation. Another example is that of the amphitheatre situated on the edge of the site, protected by trees for shading. The landscape, which is mostly flat on the site, is slightly morphed so that the seating becomes integrated with the site. The raised landscape then creates a sense of togetherness. The amphitheatre creates a social opportunity where cultural programs can take place without the need for additional infrastructure. It has a permanent seating arrangement and platform for the artists. The amphitheatre overlooks the football field and as such also becomes a seating pavilion when football games are being played. The football field also serves as a social meeting place because it will invite outsiders to participate in non-formal football games. Nestled within the wall architecture is a small public rooftop shaded by the same tent-like fabric used for the container homes. This public rooftop overlooks the whole site and the surrounding agricultural landscape, connecting inside with outside. It's a rooftop space where both insiders and outsiders can meet. It is more private compared to the piazza found below it. The piazza square in return serves as a bigger public meeting space and has various small pockets with trees and seating to encourage social meetings. Other social meeting places include the 2 bus stops, the vegetable garden and small public squares in between the containers, the square in front of the workshop spaces, the small square in front of the meditation tower, and the walkways of the container homes. The intention of this project is to respond to the current need of the refugees, which is to provide social integration opportunities. In future, more refugees might arrive in Malta, and the demand for accommodation might increase. As such, a future scenario can include increasing the accommodation with more containers on the site. Because the containers are configured in such a way that it is self-supporting, an additional layer can easily be integrated and as such increase the capacity for accommodation. Another scenario might include the decrease of refugees and essentially the decommissioning of the asylum site. Because of the need of housing in Malta, the site might be the beginning of a small new village. As such, the master urban plan can accommodate the future extension of the site into a more permanent Maltese village by following the new established urban patterns. The containers can easily be removed and replaced with traditional Maltese housing, following the language of the wall architecture. Sporting facilities in Malta are limited, and according to my knowledge, there are no centralized sporting hubs in Malta. As such, as a third scenario, the site could become a multi-sports facility by introducing tennis, volleyball and basketball courts. The wall architecture could then be converted to accommodate clubhouses and other sport facilities. There is also a current need for green public parks around Malta, as many Maltese do not want to gather on the beach. I've noticed the few public parks around Malta are heavily overpopulated with people having picnics. As a fourth future scenario, the site can be converted to a green public square by removing the containers and adding additional trees. The wall architecture could then be converted to accommodate more cafes, restaurants, and art galleries.